You are listening to the Novel Writing Podcast, episode 227. I'm your host, Colleen Mitchell. Grab a cup, cozy up, and let's get to writing. Today I'm talking with Mark Gottlieb, an executive vice president and literary agent with Trident Media Group, which is one of the most prominent literary agencies in traditional book publishing. Mark is ranked as the top fiction agent across publishing, according to Publishers Marketplace. Known for his record of securing hundreds of notable book deals across genres, Mark combines deep industry experience with a hands-on, strategic approach to author representation. He's guided debut and established authors alike to bestseller lists, major awards, and cross-media opportunities in film, television, audio, and translation. Mark taught at the Realm Makers Conference this year, touching on subjects from the end-to-end business of authorship during the pre-conference workshop, Contracts 101 for authors, and the advantages of each publishing route, indie versus traditional. Mark, welcome to the show.
Colleen, thank you so much. First of all, that's a really nice introduction. And for your listeners, no, I did not pay Colleen to make such a nice introduction for me. Thank you. And also thank you to you and the podcast for what you are doing for writers. It's very helpful to be supportive and put good information out there for them.
Well, thank you. I should say though that I totally yoinked that entire introduction from the Realm Makers program, so we can all thank Scott and Becky Miner.
Oh, well, it's all right. But yeah, no, this is a lot of it's true. Yes, what you said. And so thank you for that. But yeah, I'm happy to be here and happy to help or answer any thoughts or questions you might have.
So, for those unfamiliar, tell us more about you and Trident Media Group and how you got into the traditional publishing arena.
I would say it was a little bit different for me, actually, compared to most people who go into book publishing. And actually, historically, book publishing was something more of what we called an accidental book profession. So people kind of stumbled out of the humanities, whether they were a history major, an English major, or what, into book publishing. They graduated, they said to themselves, well, I don't want to go to law school. I don't want to be an English professor. I don't know if I'm up to the task of writing a novel yet. Oh, there's this thing called book publishing I can do. I'll try that. And so for years, it was sort of like a lot of English majors trying to make sense of how to run a business. And in more recent years, it's changed. You can now get a master's of science in book publishing, believe it or not, which is so surprising to me because it's very hard to make an exact science of book publishing. I'm just kidding. And the industry sort of changed a lot. People, go into this industry now with a lot more purpose. For me, I grew up in my family business. We own and operate the company. So given, my unique position, it's different than other people who kind of thought, oh, maybe I'll go into book publishing and see how that is. I just kind of grew up around the business all of my life. And so I set out to study publishing and to work in publishing right out of college.
So, what sort of books and authors and genres does Trident Media Group work with?
Well, we do every kind of book. I don't think there's really a kind of book that we don't do, so I would first say that practically anything between fiction, nonfiction, children's books, graphic novels, you name it. The website really lays a lot of that out for people. They can see that in terms of what we exhibit on the website. So I would say we're not really closed off to things, and it's better we see it than not because at least we'll know if it'll work or we'll know if we want to represent it when we see it, I think.
For an author who is looking to pursue traditional publishing in particular, whether it's with a big five publisher or a smaller press, what's the high level process that goes into that?
Right. Okay. Well, for most authors who are looking to approach like a major trade, big five publisher, or even most larger independent publishers for that matter, most of those places will not accept unsolicited submissions unless they come by way of a literary agency, which basically means if you don't have an agent, they just don't want to talk to you. It's really that way because there's so much material in the world. They need someone to pan for gold for them and to kind of prepare authors for the publishing process. I mean, Publishers Weekly magazine, okay, which is the foremost publication in our industry covering like the book industry and news and stuff. They've been around for, gosh, it must be like around or close to 100 years. They asked me to write the chapter for them on literary agents. They have an almanac, like a farmer's almanac, but it's a book publishing almanac they publish now and again. And I thought to myself, well, what am I going to write about in this chapter? They didn't really specify other than write us a chapter about literary agents. So I started by saying literary agents are really the on-ramp to the super highway of book publishing. They help authors, bring them up to speed so they can merge into traffic and kind of go with the rest of the flow of the traffic in publishing. And so that is true. It's agents help prepare authors and support them through the publishing process. So that's probably one of the reasons why publishers want authors to have agents. So the first thought for many authors, particularly like a hopeful writer looking to become a published author or debut author, is I need to get myself a literary agent. That's their first thought. They feel like that's the major bridge to cross, and then everything will hopefully flow from there. So they'll research agents, they'll go on different websites. The problem with the internet is it's so big. There's so much, well, there's good information, but there's also bad information, there's misinformation, and it's overwhelming. So I usually just point people to this website, Publishers Marketplace, because they do a ranking of people in the industry according to the deals they've done, as opposed to anyone else who could just launch a website and say, I'm an agent now, even though they've never done a deal before and they don't know anything about publishing. That's the scary thing about the internet. I would really go by a website like Publishers Marketplace. They search out agents, they reach out to them, they find their contact details online or go through a submissions form on their website. The agent will read their material. If they like their manuscript, the agent will probably want to have a conversation with the author, offer representation to the author. They'll send like an agency agreement or at least an understanding of their working relationship by way of email to the author. And then if the author decides they want to work together, what the agent does is they'll try and get the manuscript into the best shape they can, craft a pitch, a list of editors along a submission, and go out on submission and try to procure an offer or multiple offers, for the client to consider. And if they accept, then the publisher will, pay a book advance and draft up an agreement and start the publishing process in earnest. That's pretty much the start of things for most authors. That's at least the flow of the deal making process. But probably, as you can imagine, there's always more before and between and thereafter, right?
When I'm talking to people who want to go in traditional, one of the questions is at what point does the book get edited? And I
Mm-hmm.
know that authors should be getting the book as clean and as polished as they possibly can before even going to an agent.
Mm-hmm.
But once it is picked up by an agent, the
Mm-hmm.
editing, like the actual editing process, is with the agency, not with the publisher. Is that right?
Well, I tend to try to tell people to think of the editing process as either, sculpting, like a big block of marble. You have different tools for chiseling away. You have tools that take away big blocks or chunks of marble. You have finer tools. Or think of it like the sword polishing process. For a samurai sword, there's many different artisans who work on one samurai sword, and it doesn't go through just one polishing process. There's like over a dozen different stones meant for polishing, a sword. So most authors will first, of course, they'll read their work, they'll try and edit their own work. They'll share it with people to get feedback, ideally not your friends and family. I mean, they tend not to want to hurt your feelings. So you want to get good, honest feedback if you can. So they'll go to workshops, they'll go to writers groups. Sometimes they'll hire outside or freelance editors, which I don't always recommend because that's pretty expensive to do that. But my point is they'll often try to take the manuscript as far as they can editorially, in editing the manuscript before approaching an agent. And even then, the agent will probably have thoughts or feedback for how to further hone the manuscript, but editorially. But sometimes stuff comes in and it's perfect, believe it or not. Sometimes stuff comes in, it doesn't need all that much work. Other times it's a lot. Less so does this stuff tend to happen at the level of the publishing house. It may, but to varying degrees. But I will say a lot of editors do tend to expect, at publishing houses, do tend to expect manuscripts to pretty much come in fully polished. So it kind of falls back onto the shoulders of authors and agents then to get a manuscript is in the best shape possible. It's like a real estate agent who will, stage a home before they list it. They'll, put like furniture in there so people can picture what it looks like, or they'll even do that digitally sometimes so that people can picture what the home will look like.
My developmental editor, so I'm indie published. Her story was she kept trying to pitch to agents and trying to get an agent for the longest time with her first book. And it wasn't until she went to a writers conference and got probably like critique level feedback that they told her she needed to get it developmentally edited at that point before sending it off to an agent. because
Hmm.
she had done as much as she could, but nobody had given her the structural feedback she needed to get it in shape for an agent to say yes.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that most of what people are looking to do is, yes, in the broad strokes, the structural changes, like you say, at least initially, what we call substantive or developmental edits. It's like the big idea edits. Less so are people trying to get into the nitty-gritty of, can we fix every little detail like the spelling, grammar, syntax? Of course, as best you can, or well, use spell check or whatever you use. Some people use Grammarly or whatever. Do your best to, spell stuff the best you can and things like that. But less so, I think, early on is the editing process as into the nitty gritty. That's why I likened it to polishing a sword or doing the sculpting. When you have a big block of marble, you're first taking off the big chunks of it. Then you're using tools that are finer because if you're working with tools that are blunting objects, you could take off too much marble. And it's the same in the sword polishing process. You use coarser stones and then finer and finer stones as things go on in the sword polishing process until you get to stones that are a little softer or smoother. It's no different than coarseness of sandpaper, right?
Mm.
That's sort of the idea. People tend not to really start in the reverse, where they're, okay, I'll do all the copy editing, proofreading first, and then I'll approach the big ideas in editing, because what you could end up happening is a lot of changes occur in the manuscript, and then you need to go back in there again with the fine tools once more. So yeah, that's why that tends to be the order of things.
With my first book, we blew up the whole book like twice. So I have
Hmm.
three full versions of it before I published it. And if I
Wow.
had done copy edits on that first draft, it would have been such a waste of time and money.
Well, you ran through the manuscript a bunch of times, which is important. Most people, I think they write something, and if they edit it, they're like, well, I'll look at it once. But there are multiple passes through a manuscript that people take. They go through there and they read and read and read to check. It's not just sort of once through. It's definitely not, I wrote this thing, now I'm pushing it off my desk. It's harder to be that way, at least starting out, I'd say.
One of the things that you talked about during the pre-conference workshop was that people often confuse literary agents and editors. Can you talk a
Mhm.
little bit about that? Like, what is the difference?
Right. So agents and editors, they do similar things in different places. They have different people's interests in mind. So, what a literary agent is, we represent authors to book publishers. We negotiate their deals for them. We help to oversee the publishing process. We make sure they're having a good, a happy, a successful publishing experience. We help them sell other rights to their books, so the film and TV rights to the books, get it translated, published overseas, the audiobooks, all these different things. Basically helping books into other manifestations, even if it's merch or whatever. And we advocate on behalf of the author because we are fiduciaries, similar to if you hire a real estate agent, they are a fiduciary to you. Our work is commission based. It's almost similar to what a headhunter will do for someone, only we are doing for authors within major trade book publishing. The editor at the publishing house, it's a little bit different. I mean, the similarities kind of stop as far as, yeah, they sometimes help in editing of the manuscript and overseeing the publishing process in a sort of managerial role within the publishing house, feeding the book through all that machinery there. But the editor really is not employed by the author. They look after both, the editor looks after their own interests and the interests of the publishing house. So they can try to advocate on behalf of the author as much as they can internally in the publishing house or for their own projects. But at the end of the day, it's the publisher paying the editor's paycheck. So the good thing about having an agent is you effectively have an advocate for you and your work. And if it's an agency like ours, where our business goes to the bottom line of most every book publishing company, then naturally, we get the best deals, the best contracts, the best publishing plans for authors. I think publishers getting a submission from Trident they'll really pay attention to that. So it's very good for all those reasons. So that's sort of the main difference, I would think. It's a question of who is really the author's advocate, and in that respect, it's the agent.
The way you described the editors made me think that the editors are like HR.
Oh,
They have the
ah,
company's interests at heart, not the employees.
well, sure. If you go and complain to HR about something, they just are looking after their own necks and that of the company. So it's sort of everyone for themselves in a big corporate company structure over there. So yes, I think you're right about that. So yes, when you have an agent, it's like someone who can go in and actually make impactful changes for you within a publishing company. Because it's not just one author asking for something. When an agent or an agency is asking, it's many authors asking, if you think about it. Yeah, for that reason, it's very helpful for authors. But yeah, I don't know if you had other thoughts or other things in mind there.
Well, I was just thinking
But
that the common misconception is that editors or literary editors are agents, and I think you destroyed that conception at the conference because literary agents or literary editors at publishing houses don't actually do editing for the most part.
they really don't do a whole lot of editing except for the ones who maybe enjoy that or they tend to be of a certain generation. They might hire like an outside freelance editor if they really feel they need it. But, the main difference is that, again, the agent is advocating on behalf of the author, the editor is advocating on behalf of themselves and the publishing company. That's really the main difference.
So let's pretend an author is walking through the process and they're starting with the query letter. What should they be doing with their query letter to make sure it catches the attention of an agent or agencies that they're querying?
Sure. So, I mean, effectively, a query letter is like a cover letter for your book, if you're likening your book to your resume. And it should really be, attention grabbing. It should be well written. It's basically your storefront. It's your opportunity to showcase good writing and storytelling and to talk about your background as a writer. I tend to say a good query letter all fits on one page. The information flows easily. Like you'll probably have a hook or a quick one-line pitch for the book up front, along with some competitive book titles, which really should be, maybe two or three best-selling books you feel are similar to your book. And then, some of the exciting plot details of your book without too many spoilers, and a paragraph about yourself, a bio listing off all your relevant writing experience and writing credentials or background in writing, like how you came to writing, what inspired you along the way. It all fits on one page. The information flows easily. And that document's so important. I say it's one of these sort of magic bullets in book publishing because a well-written query letter could get you an agent. And then in turn, maybe the agent reworks the query letter into something of a pitch to book publishers. And then in turn, let's say the publisher buys the book, they'll need someone to write the jacket copy for the book. They'll oftentimes work off of the pitch. So don't be surprised if your back cover of your book or the descriptive copy on your book product page online, whatever, has some kind of resemblance to your original query letter. How cool is that? Sometimes people think, oh, this is an innocuous document. It's just I have to talk about my book and myself. Okay. And then they don't think or realize like how far that can really take you and how important it really is. And then for those who realize that, they toil over it endlessly because they just don't want to get anything wrong. They're so worried about it. And as storytellers, especially being so expansive, stories are really big ideas. They're a big canvas to work with. If you have an 80,000 word novel, how do you boil it all down to one page? So that becomes like a new or different pain point, I guess, for a lot of authors when they, realize the importance of that letter. But I try to work with people and help them shape those things. And whatever comes my way, I try my best to look at the meat and potatoes of it, give people the benefit of the doubt, just to see the promise in the work, basically. And, when I try to help authors, I just say, here, in my mind, this is what I picture as a good query letter, very simply put. And don't worry about the rest, because if you worry about all that other stuff, you'll just stress yourself out like endlessly. And if you only focus on the things you can do right and you feel confident you've done those things right, then you don't have to worry about the rest and you can sleep well at night.
I'm kind of stuck on the fact that basically the book blurb is your query letter. And so many authors that I talk to just absolutely hate writing the blurb. So it makes sense that it's difficult for them to write query letters because they have to write the blurb.
Well, yes. I mean, sometimes it ends up that way. And look, the I'm sure the language gets really reshaped as it goes
Oh,
through
for
the
sure.
publishing process. It's not, for instance, I tend to like to write my own hooks, my own quick pitches, and I like to write my own descriptive copy, and I try to rework the author's bio. I don't just like copy and paste the query letter into a pitch and say to the publisher, here's the pitch. Like I really try and hone it and shape it to the best of its ability as best it can be. And the publisher may further reshape it, through the publishing process with the author, but I'm saying it will have some kind of resemblance probably to the original letter in some way oftentimes. And yeah, it's not a synopsis though. I should say that. A lot of authors, when you ask them, "Will you pitch me your book?" they just go into a synopsis of their book, which it's not that. A synopsis is different. Those tend to be 1 to 2 pages. They really cover all the major plot points of the novel from beginning, middle to end, so all the really major spoilers are in there. It should be written in an exciting and entertaining way in and of itself, but it's sort of a document you keep in your back pocket in case anyone asks for it. The query letter is so different than that. The query letter, it reads almost like the way a book trailer does. You know how a book trailer doesn't spoil everything, but it excites you enough to want to watch the movie. So it's similar in that respect. And either way, it's hard to do because again, it's for a lot of people, they say, "Oh, it's like trying to fit an elephant into a corset." How do you do that? It's hard for storytellers to go from I have a big book, it's like a giant oil painting to one letter. It's hard to do, but it can be done and some people do it. Hopefully without too much stress or toil, or if I can help them, I'm happy to help them.
What are some common mistakes that you see authors make when they query?
Again, there's so many things you can do wrong that I tend to say to people, just focus on, here are the things you do right and focus on them. Some of the stuff I've seen, and I mentioned this at the conference, but some of the things I see that go wrong are authors who start querying before even having finished the manuscript. With regard to fiction, it's typically sold on a full manuscript, whereas nonfiction tends to be, in most cases, sold on a book proposal and like 2 or 3 sample chapters. People have to sort of get those ducks in a row. Manuscripts that are like too far outside of industry practices and norms for word count range, like, oh, please consider my, 10,000 word novel, or please consider my 600,000 word novel. It's a little polarizing, but I mean, sometimes you can work with people to bring the manuscript word count up to where it needs to be. But other times it's a little bit of a non-starter because, to start with 10,000 words and then someone say, well, you need to bring this up to novel length, like closer to 70 or 80,000 words. I mean, how do you stuff all of that in without it just being filler? So sometimes that can be a little bit difficult. I tend to think it's easier to like trim away at stuff than it is to try to add muscle to bone. And then, I'd say in nonfiction, the platform is so important. So authors really need to have a strong platform, a good semblance or direction for that before, approaching things in nonfiction. There's different things like that that can kind of go wrong. And one of the worst ones I ever got was someone pitched me a book, and I said, "This sounds great. I would love to read the manuscript." And they said, "Well, it'll be a while." And I said, "What do you mean?" And they said, "I haven't written it yet. I just wanted to kind of get your interest, and now that I see I have it, I feel inspired to go and write this." But that doesn't help anyone. That could be a while. It might never happen. The market could shift and change in that span of time. Like their interests could kind of move on. That's the tough thing with fiction, though. You do have to put all your cards on the table.
What are your thoughts on authors pitching the first in a series? I work with a lot of fantasy authors who like the books that they're working on is the first in a series, and I've heard that some publishers won't pick up things that are going to be lots of books long. Is that true?
Yeah, when I started in publishing, I used to see these 6, 8, 10 book deals or more where publishers were like buying books in a series, many books out. Granted, that was for, very established authors like New York Times bestselling authors and things like that. More so now you see smaller book deals and publishers being a little non-committal. They kind of say, "We'll buy the first book and see how that goes." And if it's the first book in the series, if the book is successful, well, naturally we'll want to do more books in that series. If it's not as successful, maybe we'll look to do a standalone title or a different series with you. So authors, they have end up having to show a lot of flexibility to publishers in terms of, hey, this can work as a series or it can work as a standalone title. I left it open-ended enough. And then other times they come to publishers with a range of standalone titles because they know they can try each of those on their own. But I think the feeling among most people in publishing is they like to replicate success wherever possible. And so it's good to be optimistic in that way, not to think like, oh, the publisher doesn't want to commit to all three books in my series right away. They're not really interested. Well, publishers are very risk averse, so they tend to want to just first see how things go. And if they're going well, then it's like they're very reactionary at that point. They're like, okay, we're all in. We can finally see it now. So that's sort of a funny thing to watch, but it's nice when it happens in a good way for authors.
Earlier, you mentioned that authors would search for agents to pitch to. As somebody who has never done that, what are the factors that authors should consider when searching for agencies or agencies that they might want to query?
Sure. And we spoke about this a little bit, but again, I think Publishers Marketplace is a good website because it's effectively like IMDb, the Internet Movie Database for book publishing. Industry news and deals are announced there. They rank the agents and the agencies according to the deals they do. So, for instance, our agency leads the publishing industry in fiction sales for amount of money for book deals. So, if you're thinking to yourself, I want to work with the agency that is doing the most amount of money for fiction, by the number of those deals, then yeah, you would look at Trident Media Group where I work. I happen to lead the industry in fiction sales by number of fiction deals. And then you can drill down into individual categories from there. There's like agents who have, strong rankings in a given genre or something like that. But historically, our agency has led the publishing industry, yes, both in fiction and nonfiction, in amount of money for deals and in volume of deals. It's just been that way for decades, according to Publishers Marketplace. And then, yes, I happen to lead the agency where I work in lifetime number of book deals, which is pretty remarkable because they're folks at the agency have been in publishing decades longer than me. So you might look at factors like that, when searching out an agent and say to yourself, like, all right, I want to shoot for the moon. And, even if I miss, maybe I land among the stars, but people will kind of work their way down a list like that. Some people think I'll just go to everyone at once, or maybe I'll start with some small places. And if I get an offer, I can work my way up to a bigger agency. But I think the best thing is just always aim high, go to the biggest or the best agency or the agent you really, really want to work with. You'll get better results that way, basically, is what I think. And so, yeah, on that website, they'll list again the agent's name and contact details. You can reach out that way. You can read their bio. You can see the kinds of books they've worked with, and you can look at their client list and things like that. It will give you a good feel for who they are and what they're doing. For instance, my bio on the Trident Media Group website will say a lot of the things that you mentioned early in the podcast here. And you'll see other interesting things like, of course, I studied publishing. I lecture on publishing at a lot of schools, like I've done so at Yale and Cambridge, at Columbia and elsewhere. And then the volunteer work I do around literacy. There's different things that might then shape your opinion of a person and their work. But yeah, you could start that way and reach out that way. I think that's the best way to search out agents. Otherwise, the internet is just too big a place. ChatGPT, Google, they don't always get it right. You should really just look at the proof in the pudding, which is, okay, what are the actual deals getting done? Who are the people doing the deals? Not who is the person claiming they're an agent and that they've done deals when, oh no, I looked them up on Publishers Marketplace and they've never done a deal before. That's the best way to go about it, I say. Look at their actual credentials and their actual work and accomplishments.
So let's say an author wants to work with Trident Media Group, and like your company is the one they want to work with. They enter a submission, but they get a no back. If they want to submit again, what would the process be for that? Like time length to wait, prepping or redoing their query letter? Is there a process that authors can consider to resubmit to the same agency?
Yes, I think I love how my camera automatically pans like the moment you ask that question, like, okay, here comes a very serious answer. Luckily, I think on the website there's some language there. I think it's something like 30 days you're able to, if you haven't received a response after your original submission, you're able to resubmit to the website. The website will otherwise bar you from doing so. I think it registers like both your email address and IP address or something like that. But after 30 days, you're free to resubmit or try someone else at the agency. I would say usually maybe 9 times out of 10, no response sometimes equates with a lack of interest on the person's part. But I think it's good to let people know, definitely if you've gotten an offer or something like that. And we're usually pretty collegial where I work. Like, even if something's not for me necessarily, but I see a lot of promise in the work, I'll usually go to a colleague at Trident who I work with and say, hey, maybe this is for you. It's like, this sounds really cool. I could see it working well. I've put a few authors with colleagues of mine that way, and they were very successful in getting those books sold. So it does happen. It does work out. Not everyone's as receptive in that way, but sometimes it happens. So I think no matter what, keep trying. You do have to have a lot of grit, a lot of determination about you as an author. Thick skin definitely always helps. It doesn't get easier for even the most successful authors. They're still worrying about many of the same things new authors do. Only it's sort of like raising kids. What do they say? Big kids, big problems, little kids, little problems. I think you just keep at it no matter what and be determined and just don't be discouraged by rejection because that's actually a natural part of the process. And even again, even the big authors will inevitably experience that for themselves.
That's actually a really good segue into the next question, which is about pitching to agents and editors at conferences. So, a lot of authors will go to conferences specifically for the pitch meetings. And like aside from the obvious benefits of practicing your pitch and then getting feedback on those pitches, do you actually see manuscripts picked up from those? Because I often hear about authors who do those pitches and then they get like a request for either the manuscript or the first few chapters only for the rejection to come later in email. And the impression that those authors get is that the agent just does not want to say no.
Huh. Well, I try to be honest and upfront with people, but I can only speak for myself. I mean, that kind of goes for all of this advice. I'm only speaking from my own experience, what I think works best, how I think people ought to be or how things ought to go. I can't speak for everyone. I'm sure there will always be conflicting advice people will get elsewhere, but one of the reasons why at the conference I showed people, for instance, my ranking in the industry and the agency's ranking in the industry, it wasn't to brag, it's meant as good information. And I say it to people so they know that they're getting information from a good source, if that's useful. With conferences, I say it's always best to approach it not with what can I get out of this, but what can I give to this? And that really goes for everyone. When I first started going to writers' conferences, what happened was, and this is before COVID, when everything was fully online, people weren't really into Zoom the way they are now. I was going to a writers' conference like every 2 weeks. It was nuts. Yeah. And I couldn't go to every one. Like I had to turn certain ones away if there were scheduling conflicts and things like that. And I would basically come home and it felt like coming home to do laundry and living out of a rolly bag. And I was just starting out as an agent. And so I thought, where am I going to find the next big best-selling author? Where could they be? Could they be hiding under here or there? And I was going to conferences looking for that, trying to find the cheese in the maze. And after a while, when that didn't really happen at all, after many, many conferences, more than I can count. I mean, I had been to just about every state in the United States, and I thought maybe I'll get to see all 50 states. I didn't quite get to that point. I got to see just about every region of the US except for Alaska. I even made it to Hawaii, and some international ones too. But I was burning out on it. And I said to my mom, who she used to work in publishing, she was a contracts administrator. So basically, like a paralegal in book publishing, she worked at a publishing house, reviewing contracts and running contracts departments. I said, I'm getting so tired of doing this. I'm having all these pitch meetings and I'm just not finding a bestseller. Like a lot of authors who are then going, or even authors who are then going on to get published. If it does happen, it's almost like happening once in a blue moon. And she says, well, you can't stop going to these conferences. And I say, why not? And she says, because that's not why you're there. I said, why am I going to these conferences? Why am I there? And she said, you're there to give back because you can't continue to take from the well without giving back. You're there, if you're lucky, you get to show the company flag, do some networking, with people through the industry, help people through their process, make their journey, their publishing journey in life lighter than it could otherwise be. And if something really good happens of it, you find a best-selling author, or something like that, well, that was just a byproduct then of all that good stuff that happened. So I had already signed up for my next conference, and I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to approach it the way that she said to me. And I went to that conference, and I went to every meeting. Instead of walking to the meetings, these rounds of pitch meetings, thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I'm going to need some aspirin after all this, I thought to myself, I'm going to ask questions of people and try to help them improve their pitch, give them advice, make them better writers and storytellers and better presenters in the process, like how they present themselves. I'm not going to worry about what I get in return. I just want to have a good feeling that I helped someone, which I've always liked to do. I feel like that's also innate to most people too. People, I think at their core, hopefully all want to do good things for other people in life. So I approached it that way. Sometimes they would say, why are you asking these certain questions and things? And I'd say, well, this is all meant to help you. And by the end of the meeting, regardless of whether I said yes or no to someone, they all felt like they had a lot more wind in their sails. And I tried to be honest and upfront with people. If it wasn't for me, I told them. If I thought they should try a colleague of mine, I told them. If it just needed a lot more work and I felt they weren't ready, I told them. And regardless, I feel like everyone walks away feeling edified that way, even myself. And you'd be surprised, but it got a lot easier at that point in time to go to conferences. How about that? So I still go to a lot of conferences and I won't say no to any of them. That's why I said, for instance, when Realm Makers reached out, my default setting is always yes with people. I feel like you get farther in life that way than you do saying no to things. You want to talk yourself into business, not talk yourself out of it. And I'll tell you too, some good things still start happen from that. Started to and continued to happen from that. Finding authors who then went on to get published. I found an author, for instance, at the Writers League of Texas, who he pitched me his book. And I'll tell you, he had a few agents before me, 5 manuscripts before me, before, the one he showed me, that all didn't sell. And he was going to give up. And he was a PhD in creative writing. He was teaching creative writing to students, and he couldn't get a novel published. So he was going to just give up. And anyway, he pitched me the book. I said, it sounds great. I can sell this. He says, how do you know you haven't read the manuscript yet? I said, I have to read it so I know everything you're saying here is backed up by the words on the page. But if it is, then yes, I feel like I can sell this. And we did. It sold to Simon and Schuster, a Big Five publisher. And so the rest was history. He was so happy with that. So good things do happen at conferences like that. But I have to be honest, it is a once in a blue moon thing, but you have to be in it to win it. If you're not, buying the ticket, you can't take the ride. You can't be there to try and have that experience. So you always got to step into traffic no matter what. Whether it's conferences or anything in life, just you have to set foot into traffic.
Sounds like your mom had the best advice ever.
Well, she is just sort of good and wholesome that way, but I'm sure she's seen a lot of this for herself in other manifestations in life and just I think a lot of things in life are sort of your outlook on things. Are you a glass half full or half empty person, And that can actually change and shape things. It's not just, oh, I'm actually not happy in my present circumstance, but I'll try and pretend I'm happy and then
Mm.
maybe I'll just get through this. If I'm just fooling myself, I feel better. Actually, if you think pretty positively, then actually good things start to flow from that. It's interesting how that works. So it is always best to try and bet on success if you can, than to kind of undermine yourself or hedge bets against yourself. That's what I think anyway. I mean, I do have friends who I tell them this and still they are very always have a bleak outlook no matter what. They're very like you would think they read too much like Friedrich Nietzsche or something.
Ugh, a little bit of a shudder there. If listeners who are interested in traditional publishing remember just one thing from this episode, what do you want that to be?
Ooh, I do think if you're a writer starting out, think highly of yourself, hold your head high, be audacious, just have high hopes for yourself, and that's where your work will head to. So always aim high, go for the top. If you want to be with the biggest publisher, imagine your dream team of biggest publisher and biggest agency and things like that. And also in terms of sort of self-esteem, I guess it's all in that category. And I mentioned rejection being a big part of the process. Like, just have a lot of grit about you because the people who succeed that I've seen succeed and over a number of years are the people who they've realized that this is not a sprint. This is very much so a marathon. And that even if they fall down, what's the adage or there's an expression, I think a Japanese proverb about it, fall down once,
Fall down
uh,
7 times, get up 8.
fall down 7 times, get up eight. Exactly. Yes, it's like that. So like always take that extra step forward and you'll just continue advancing that way.
Where is the best place to connect with you or with Trident Media Group?
Well, we have a website, tridentmediagroup.com. I'm there on the website listed under the agents there. I've got some social media accounts online and things like that. People can kind of reach out or follow that way. I'm on like Instagram and Facebook. I'm on Twitter, although sometimes I look around Twitter and I think to myself, this place seems a lot more quiet than it used to be. So I'm thinking, and I'm on Substack too, but I'm thinking like, where's the next place I go to on social media? Maybe that's not like Twitter anymore, or what the old Twitter was. So we'll figure that out. But yeah, I'm out there. I try to put myself out there and make myself reachable to people.
Thank you again for joining me with and sharing your wisdom and all this. It's been really good talking with you.
Of course. Thanks, Colleen. I appreciate you having me. Thank you for all that you do for writers, storytellers, and it's a great podcast.
Thank you. All right, everybody, that is it for today's episode. To watch the video of this interview and support the podcast, please head over to the Substack link in the description. Thank you for joining us, and remember, the first draft is supposed to be garbage. The Novel Writing Podcast is a production of Colleen Mitchell Writes. For more writing resources, including Curios, Tally Inc. author services, and the 60-day novel writing challenge, check out the links in the description.